Hey there, when most people think of a pawn shop, they might picture a dusty old place on a forgotten street corner. Maybe they think of it as a last resort, a place you go when you're down on your luck. But let me tell you, that's only a tiny piece of a much bigger story. Pawn shops are one of the oldest forms of banking in the world. They have a history that's more fascinating and more important than you could ever imagine. We're talking about a business that has been around for thousands of years, helping everyone from kings and queens to regular folks like you and me. It's a story filled with history, surprising treasures, and incredible human resilience. In my shop, every day is a new adventure. One minute I'm looking at a Civil War sword, the next I'm trying to figure out if a guitar was really played by a rock legend. Every single item that comes through my door has a story. It's not just about the money, it's about the history locked inside that object. That's what makes this business so exciting. It's a living, breathing museum where the exhibits change every single day. The history of pawnbroking itself is just like that, a collection of amazing stories that tell us a lot about how people have lived, struggled, and survived through the ages. It's a business built on trust, knowledge, and a little bit of a gamble. Think about it this way, before there were big banks on every corner, where did people go when they needed cash fast? They couldn't just swipe a credit card or apply for a loan online. They needed a simple, quick, and reliable way to get some money to pay for food, fix a broken wagon, or even fund a war. That's where the pawnbroker came in. They were the original community bankers. They provided a service that was essential for society to function. This business isn't just about buying and selling cool stuff. It's about providing a financial service that has stood the test of time, helping people navigate the ups and downs of life. So get ready to take a journey back in time. We're going to explore the incredible history of pawnbroking, from its earliest days in ancient China to its role in building America. We'll look at how it helped famous explorers and everyday families. We'll uncover some wild stories and maybe even bust a few myths you might have about this business. By the end, I think you'll see pawn shops in a whole new light. You'll understand that they are more than just stores. They are a fundamental part of our shared human history, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. Trust me, it's a story worth knowing. Let's turn the clock way back. I'm talking thousands of years. The history of pawnbroking didn't start in some back alley in Las Vegas. It started in some of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. The earliest records we have of pawnbroking come from ancient China, over 3,000 years ago. Back then, peasant farmers often needed a way to get through the tough months before a harvest. They would pledge their tools, their winter coats, or other personal items to a pawnbroker in exchange for money or grain. It was a simple system based on collateral, and it worked. These early pawn shops were often run by Buddhist monasteries, believe it or not. The idea wasn't just in China either. It popped up all over the ancient world because it filled a basic human need. In ancient Greece and Rome, pawnbroking was a common and well-regulated business. The Romans were masters of law and order, and they had specific laws that governed how pawnbrokers operated. A person could get a loan by leaving something valuable, like a piece of jewelry or a statue, with the lender. If they paid the loan back with interest, they got their item back. If not, the pawnbroker could sell it. It was a straightforward deal that provided much-needed cash to merchants, soldiers, and citizens. This system was a game changer. It allowed for what we call liquidity in the economy. That's a fancy word for making sure cash can move around to where it's needed most. Before pawnbroking, if you owned a valuable asset like a family heirloom but had no cash, you were stuck. You couldn't exactly pay for your groceries with your great-grandmother's necklace. The pawnbroker acted as a bridge, turning that non-cash asset into usable money. This helped keep local economies moving and gave people a safety net that simply didn't exist before. It was a practical solution to a universal problem. Even in ancient India, the concept was well established. Ancient Indian legal texts, some dating back to the 4th century BC, mention rules about lending and interest rates based on pledged items. This shows that pawnbroking wasn't just some fringe activity, it was a core part of the financial system across different cultures. It was a testament to human ingenuity. People figured out a way to leverage the value of what they owned without having to sell it permanently. This simple but powerful idea laid the foundation for a business that would survive empires, revolutions, and the passage of millennia. It all started with a simple need and a simple promise. As we move forward into the Middle Ages in Europe, the story of pawnbroking gets even more interesting. After the fall of the Roman Empire, things were a bit chaotic. Formal banking systems collapsed, and charging interest on loans, known as usury, was forbidden by the Catholic Church for Christians. This created a huge problem. People still needed loans, especially with all the wars, famines, and general uncertainty of the time. Who was going to provide them? This is where a few key groups stepped in, and the pawn industry as we know it really began to take shape in Europe. The most famous symbol of pawnbroking, the 3 golden balls, comes from this era. This symbol is linked to the Medici family of Florence, Italy. The Medicis were an incredibly powerful banking family who basically funded the Renaissance. Legend has it that one of the Medicis, in the service of Emperor Charlemagne, fought a giant and slayed him with 3 sacks of rocks. The 3 balls on the family's coat of arms represented these rocks. As the Medicis became the most powerful bankers in Europe, their family symbol became associated with money lending. Pawnbrokers in Lombardy, Italy, adopted this symbol, and as they spread across Europe, the 3 balls became the international sign of a pawn shop. While the Medicis dealt with kings and popes, another group called the Lombards became the everyday pawnbrokers of Europe. They were skilled merchants and moneylenders from northern Italy who set up shop in cities like London, Paris, and Amsterdam. In London, their influence was so strong that the main financial district is still known as Lombard Street today. They provided essential loans to merchants, artisans, and nobles alike. They weren't always popular, as no one likes paying interest, but they provided a service that was desperately needed. They kept the wheels of commerce turning during a very difficult period in history. Another important development was the Monti di Pietà, or Mounts of Piety. These were charitable pawn shops started by Franciscan friars in Italy in the 15th century. They were created as an alternative to high-interest lenders. The idea was to provide small loans to the poor with very low interest rates, just enough to cover the operating costs. This was a form of institutionalized charity that recognized the poor needed access to credit without being exploited. These establishments were a huge success and spread throughout Catholic Europe, showing that pawnbroking could be a force for social good, not just a for-profit business. When European settlers began coming to America, they brought their customs, their tools, and their financial systems with them. That included the practice of pawnbroking. In the early colonial days, life was tough. People were starting from scratch, and cash was often in short supply. Formal banks were few and far between, and they mostly served wealthy merchants and landowners. For the average person, a farmer, a blacksmith, or a new immigrant, the pawnbroker was often the only source of a quick loan. They were a fixture in growing cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Boston almost from the very beginning. As America grew, and the Industrial Revolution took hold in the 19th century, the role of the pawn shop became even more critical. Millions of people flocked to the cities to work in factories. They often lived paycheck to paycheck, and an unexpected expense, like a doctor's bill or a period of unemployment, could be disastrous. The pawn shop became an essential part of the urban working-class neighborhood. A man might pawn his Sunday suit on Monday to buy food for the week, then redeem it on Friday after getting paid. It was a cycle that helped many families stay afloat during uncertain economic times. The image of the American pawnbroker also began to form during this period. They were often immigrants themselves, part of the local community. They had to be shrewd businesspeople, able to appraise everything from a gold watch to a set of carpenter's tools. They also had to be pillars of the community. A good pawnbroker knew his customers, understood their struggles, and operated on a system of trust. Of course, there were always stories of shady operators, but for the most part, these were small, family-run businesses that provided a vital service. They were the unofficial credit unions of the working poor. The Great Depression. In the 1930s was a defining moment for pawn shops in America. When the banks failed and millions lost their jobs, people turned to the only asset they had left, their personal belongings. Pawn shops were flooded with everything from wedding rings to musical instruments to family heirlooms. Pawnbrokers saw firsthand the desperation of the American people. While they couldn't solve the economic crisis, they provided a small measure of relief, a few dollars to buy bread or keep the lights on for another week. It was a grim time, but it cemented the pawn shop's role as a financial shock absorber in the American economy. Let's get down to the brass tacks of what we do. At its core, a pawn shop provides a simple, secure loan. It's not like a bank loan, where they check your credit score, ask for your job history, and make you fill out a mountain of paperwork. A pawn loan is based solely on the value of the item you bring in. You bring me a guitar, I figure out what it's worth, and I offer you a loan based on that value. It's quick, it's confidential, and your credit history doesn't matter one bit. If you can't pay the loan back, you don't get a black mark on your credit report, and nobody comes knocking on your door. You simply lose the item you pledged. This model is a lifeline for a lot of people. Think about a small business owner, maybe a landscaper. His lawnmower breaks down in the middle of his busiest season. He needs $300 to fix it right now, but he won't get paid by his clients until the end of the week. The bank won't give him a loan that small or that fast. He can come to my shop, pawn a piece of jewelry or some power tools he owns, get the cash on the spot, and fix his mower. He's back in business the same day. Once he gets paid, he comes back, repays the loan, plus the interest, and gets his stuff back. The pawn shop bridged the gap and kept his business from grinding to a halt. It's not just for business owners. We see people from all walks of life. I've had students come in to pawn a laptop to pay for their textbooks until their student loan check arrives. I've had families pawn a TV to cover an unexpected medical bill for their child. These aren't people who are financially irresponsible. They are regular people hit by one of life's curveballs. The traditional banking system often doesn't serve people who need a small, short-term loan. We fill that gap. We provide a service that is respectful and discreet, giving people a way to solve a temporary cash flow problem without going into long-term debt. The great thing about a pawn loan is that it puts the power in the customer's hands. They decide if the loan is worth it. They decide if the mandi audibuan kakanan mai daban arnam mandabaten farns unum. Thusdom furtsdom. There are no hidden fees or complicated contracts. Everything is explained upfront: the loan amount, the interest rate, and the due date. In most states, like here in Nevada, the industry is heavily regulated to protect the consumer. We're not just some random guys making up rules. We have to follow state and federal laws, just like any other financial institution. We provide a safe, regulated option for people who need help. In this business, I've learned one thing for sure. You have to expect the unexpected. The stories I could tell you would fill a dozen books. One of the most famous pawnshop stories in history involves royalty. Back in the 15th century, King Edward III of England was in a tight spot financially during the 100 Years' War with France. He was so broke that he pawned the crown jewels to a group of Lombard moneylenders to fund his army. Can you imagine the appraisal on that? All right, Your Majesty. The scepter looks good, but there's a scratch on this ruby. He eventually got them back, but it just goes to show that everyone, even kings, can find themselves in need of a little quick cash. Another incredible story that's become a part of American history involves Christopher Columbus. We all know the story of how Queen Isabella of Spain funded his voyage to the New World. But the popular legend is that she was so committed to the cause that she pawned her personal crown and jewels to raise the money. Now, historians debate whether this actually happened, or if it's just a great story. Some say the royal treasury had enough funds. But the legend has persisted for centuries because it captures the spirit of pawnbroking, sacrificing something valuable for a chance at a greater reward. It's the ultimate gamble, pledging your most prized possessions on a belief in a dream. Now let me tell you one from my own experience. A while back, a guy came into the shop with a bronze statue. It was a bust of a Roman-looking guy, and it was heavy. He said he bought it at a garage sale for a few $100 and just wanted to flip it for a small profit. I looked it over, and something about the craftsmanship felt right. It felt old. I did some research, and my gut was telling me this could be something special. We had it authenticated by an expert, and it turned out to be a 2,000-year-old Roman bust that had been lost for centuries. The guy who brought it in walked away with a life-changing amount of money. You just never know. These kinds of stories are what make the pawn world so electrifying. It's not always about Roman statues or royal jewels. Sometimes it's the personal stories that stick with you. A young musician pawns his first electric guitar to pay rent. And years later, after he's made it big, he comes back to buy it back for sentimental reasons. A woman sells her father's old war medals and uses the money to buy a plane ticket to see her family for the first time in years. These items are more than just metal and wood. They are pieces of people's lives, and being a part of those stories is a privilege. Pawn shops have always had a certain mystique, and Hollywood has definitely picked up on that. For a long time, movies and TV shows didn't exactly paint us in the best light. The pawnbroker was often portrayed as a shady, greedy character in a dark, grimy shop. Think about movies from the 1940s and 50s. The pawn shop was usually a place where desperate characters went to fence stolen goods or get a few bucks for their last valuable possession before hitting rock bottom. It was a symbol of failure and despair. That image became stuck in a lot of people's minds, and it's been a tough reputation to shake. This stereotype was everywhere. In Charlie Chaplin's 1916 silent film, The Pawn Shop, he plays a bumbling pawnshop assistant, and the shop is a chaotic place filled with quirky and desperate customers. While it was a comedy, it reinforced the idea of the pawn shop as a place on the fringes of society. Fast forward to more modern films, and you still see it. A down-on-his-luck hero in an action movie might have to pawn a cherished memento to buy weapons or get out of town. The pawn shop is rarely shown as a normal, legitimate business. It's always portrayed as something a little bit dangerous or sad, but then something started to change. Reality television came along, and suddenly, people got a chance to see what really goes on inside a modern pawn shop. Shows like mine, Pawn Stars, opened the doors and let the cameras in. People could see that we weren't shady characters in a back alley. We were a family business. We were historians, appraisers, and negotiators. We dealt with fascinating historical artifacts and met interesting people every single day. The focus shifted from the desperation of the seller to the history and value of the item. It turned the pawn shop from a place of last resort into a treasure chest of history. This new perspective has done a lot to change public opinion. People are now more curious and less judgmental about pawn shops. They see the fun and excitement of the business, the thrill of the hunt for a rare item, the deep historical knowledge required, and the art of making a deal. It's shown that pawn shops are run by knowledgeable professionals who are passionate about history. It's made people realize that a pawn shop can be a cool place to visit, a place where you can see a piece of history up close. We've gone from being a movie trope to being the main characters in our own story, and that's been a great thing for the entire industry. The pawn business has been around for 3,000 years, and you don't survive that long without being able to adapt. The pawn shop of the 21st century is a world away from the dusty, dimly lit shops of the past. While the core business of making collateral loans remains the same, the way we do business has been completely transformed by technology. Today's pawnbroker uses the internet for everything. When someone brings in a vintage watch or a rare comic book, I don't have to rely on a stack of old reference books. I can get on my computer and instantly access databases, auction results, and expert forums from around the world to determine an accurate price. This technology helps not just me, but the customer too. It brings transparency to the process. A customer can do their own research on their smartphone before they even walk in the door. They have a better idea of what their item is worth, which leads to a fairer and more straightforward negotiation. Furthermore, many pawn shops now have a major online presence. We don't just sell to people who walk into our shop in Las Vegas. We have online stores on sites like eBay, where we can sell our unique inventory to collectors and buyers all over the globe. This has opened up a massive new market for us. The way we manage the business has also been modernized. Gone are the days of handwritten ledgers and paper receipts. Everything is computerized. We use sophisticated software to track inventory, manage loans, and ensure we are compliant with all state and federal regulations. This includes reporting to law enforcement to help prevent the sale of stolen goods. This technology makes us more efficient, more secure, and more accountable. It helps us run a professional operation that is on par with any other modern retail or financial business. It's all about building trust with our customers and our community. Even the loan process itself is evolving. Some pawn businesses are developing apps that allow customers to manage their loans online, make payments, or even get an initial estimate for an item by uploading a photo. The classic in-person transaction will always be the heart of the business because you have to see and touch an item to truly know its value. But technology is making the entire process more convenient and accessible. The pawn industry is proving that it can embrace the future without losing the fundamental principles that have made it successful for centuries. We're still here, still helping people, just with better tools. So, after this journey through 3,000 years of history, you might be wondering, in a world of online banking, credit cards, and payday loans, is there still a place for the humble pawn shop? My answer is a resounding yes. Pawn shops are more relevant today than ever before. The basic need for quick, accessible cash hasn't gone away. In fact, for many people, the traditional financial system is failing them. Banks have stricter lending requirements, and credit can be hard to come by if you don't have a perfect score. Pawn shops offer a simple, dignified alternative without the risk of long-term debt. We serve a huge portion of the American population. According to some studies, a large number of Americans don't have enough savings to cover a $400 emergency. When that emergency strikes, where do they turn? A pawn loan is often a much better option than a high-interest payday loan or running up credit card debt. It's a responsible choice because the loan is secured by an asset. The worst that can happen is you lose your item. You won't get caught in a cycle of debt that ruins your financial future. We provide a safety valve for the economy, helping people manage short-term financial bumps in the road. Beyond the financial services, pawn shops are also incredible recycling centers for culture and history. Where else can you find a 19th century sword, a 1960s Fender guitar, and a Super Bowl ring all under one roof? We rescue items that might have otherwise been thrown away or forgotten in an attic. We give them a new life by finding a new owner who will appreciate them. We are curators of cool stuff, guardians of history that you can actually touch and own. We make history accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy collectors who bid at fancy auction houses. In the end, the pawn shop is a reflection of the human experience. It's about value, not just in dollars and cents, but in history, sentiment, and craftsmanship. It's a business built on stories. The stories of the items and the stories of the people who own them. For as long as people have possessions they value, and for as long as they face unexpected financial needs, there will be a need for the pawnbroker. We've been here for thousands of years, through good times and bad, and I have no doubt that we'll be here for thousands more, because you never know what's going to come through that door.